Overnight, the United States and United Kingdom launched relatively limited military strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. Nobody panic. This is not the start of World War III, but it is significant. So we'll get into what happened, why, and what to expect going forward, as well as Israel's response to allegations of genocide brought forward by South Africa. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to what started as a war between Israel and Hamas and quite a while ago turned into a broader regional conflict. I'm recording this at 8:30 a.m. Central on Friday, January 12th, 2024. So according to the U.S. military, 60 targets in 16 different locations in Yemen were attacked with more than 100 precision munitions fired from fighter planes, warships, and submarines last night. The Houthis confirmed this to a degree, saying that 73 raids carried out by the U.S. and U.K. forces led to the death of 5 martyrs and the injury of 6 others from their armed forces. And more on that in a second, the casualty toll versus the equipment destroyed. U.S. President Biden said, quote, "These targeted strikes are a clear message that the United States and our partners will not tolerate attacks on our personnel or allow hostile actors to imperil freedom of navigation," end quote. And then a U.S. official said the targets were not just symbolic, but intended to weaken the Houthis' ability to attack, saying, quote, "We were going after very specific capability in very specific locations with precision munitions," end quote. So at some point, we're likely to see some sort of battle damage assessment. Maybe the Houthis will release more. Maybe it'll come via satellite imagery, something like that. What you're likely to see is not, destroyed apartment buildings and residential complexes or even the barracks where soldiers were staying, but instead military infrastructure, right? So radar sites, maybe ports where some of the ships were docked, used to board and seize some of these commercial vessels, missile launch locations, facilities used to manufacture and assemble the one-way attack drones that the Houthis have used to attack U.S., U.K., other allied shipping, as well as commercial vessels in the region. So the reason for that, the reason these targets would have been selected is what you could kind of consider proportional plus, right? The United States and United Kingdom wanted to select targets and carry out a scope of an attack that would make the Houthis think twice about doing this in the future. The risk isn't worth the reward, essentially, but not so extreme to where the international community would look at this and say that is way out of line. I mean, for instance, if these strikes took out all Houthi military and civilian leadership and killed 2,000 Yemeni civilians, that would not be viewed by very many people as proportional to drone and missile attacks against various commercial vessels in the Red Sea. And then from the Houthi side, as soon as these attacks kicked off, within 7 minutes, they said they were launching drones and missiles at American forces in the region. It's not clear if that actually happened or not. They have done it quite a bit in the past, but spokespeople for the U.S. military said that there were no Houthi attacks detected during or immediately after these strikes. And then a Houthi statement following this series of airstrikes said, "This brutal aggression will not dissuade Yemen from its position of support and support for the oppression of the Palestinian people. And the Yemeni armed forces confirm their continued prevention of Israeli ships or those heading to the ports of occupied Palestine from navigation in the Arab and Red Seas." So in terms of what led up to the U.S. and U.K. strike on Houthi targets in Yemen, yesterday, the Houthis fired an anti-ship ballistic missile into international shipping lanes in the Gulf of Aden. One commercial vessel reported visually observing the missile impact the water. Fortunately, no casualties or damage was reported. This was the 27th Houthi attack on international shipping since November 19th. That series of attacks against international shipping led the United States, alongside 13 of our allies, to issue a joint statement on January 3rd saying any further attacks against civilian or military vessels in the Red Sea would risk a military response. And since then, we've had at least 3 separate attacks carried out by the Houthis, 2 against commercial vessels, and then a total of 21 drones and missiles fired in a complex attack at U.S. and U.K. ships in the area. Unfortunately, all of those drones and missiles were shot down. Now, the Houthi argument here is tied to the Genocide Convention, which says that any state that sees a genocide taking place is obligated to step in. So the Houthis are saying there's a genocide taking place in Gaza. It is our duty to step in and do what we can. In this case, stop shipping moving to Israeli ports until the siege of Gaza is lifted and humanitarian aid is allowed in. That is the Houthi stance as to why they're doing what they're doing. Now, this is an escalation of sorts. I mean, it's a pretty big step up for U.S. involvement in the ongoing regional tensions, but this war had already expanded well outside of Israel. I mean, for months now, Hezbollah and the IDF have been exchanging blows. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria have targeted U.S. forces more than 130 times. In response, the U.S. has carried out a handful of strikes against those militia facilities and some of their leadership figures. The Syrian army has fired into Israeli territory, and Israel has conducted multiple strikes at locations all across Syria. The Houthis in Yemen conducted attacks against southern Israel and really ramped up their attacks of commercial and military vessels in the Red Sea. And now we have the U.S. response to that specific threat. So yes, escalation was a significant event, a military strike carried out by the United States against the Houthis in Yemen. But this became a regional war months ago. Really what we're seeing over the last 12 to 18 hours here is the United States signaling their willingness to take military action against one or more of these groups. So what comes next after the U.S. and U.K. targeted Houthi forces in Yemen? For starters, this is not the opening salvo of a pending invasion of Yemen. It was a relatively limited strike against Houthi military infrastructure involved in their ongoing attacks into the Red Sea. In turn, there's kind of three areas to keep an eye on when it comes to some sort of response, if that actually comes. First off, attacks against U.S. forces in the region. So there are American bases in Iraq and Syria that are the most likely targets, but we do have forces scattered throughout the region that could also be at risk. Now, if we see a handful of drone and rocket attacks against U.S. military bases in the coming days, that's essentially some of these groups, the axis of resistance under Iran, backing off. I mean, those attacks are pretty normal. We need to see something quite a bit more significant to show any sort of significant retaliation on their part. This could be potentially ballistic missiles fired from the Houthis, Iran, or maybe even Hezbollah. That would be a pretty big step up from the kind of rickety drones that the U.S. is shooting down on a near daily basis. The second and pretty obvious one here would be an increase in Houthi attacks against U.S. and allied naval vessels in the Red Sea. Now, the Houthis already kind of hinted at this, but we'll have to wait and see if they actually follow through. The Houthis do possess a pretty significant arsenal that includes things like anti-ship ballistic missiles and waterborne unmanned surface vessels that could do significant damage against some of our or our allied warships. You know, that capability exists. Lastly, would be some sort of direct Iranian response, likely tied to commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf or the Gulf of Oman. There's quite a bit of history here as it comes to Iran interfering with oil tankers, even seizing some to the point where it's had an impact on the global economy. This is right in their backyard, relatively easy pull-off for Iran, or at least compared to a direct military strike against U.S. forces in the region. So keep an eye out for some sort of reaction like that as well. So I think it's worth spending a couple minutes explaining who the Houthis are, because I feel like a lot of people probably woke up this morning and saw news that the U.S. and U.K. struck Houthi military targets in Yemen, and like, what is that? I've never heard that word before. That's fair. I don't think a lot of people have. So the Houthis, probably best to start with their flag, give you an overview of who they are. The flag translates here to Allah is great, death to America, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam. So the Houthis are a political and military organization that rose to power through the recent and still unresolved Yemeni civil war, which has been brutal. Now, the war is unresolved, but it's kind of cold right now, if that makes sense. So the internationally recognized government is the Republic of Yemen, not the Houthis. The Republic of Yemen still exists and technically holds more territory today than the Houthis do, but they're still at odds. The Houthi movement is predominantly Sunni, but it's better aligned as like a national movement than really split along any sort of sectarian lines. And I think one of the confusing aspects here with the Houthis is because they are not the recognized government of Yemen, and for so long were considered this rebel movement, it catches people off guard to learn that they have a significant arsenal. This is all through Iran. Iran either providing direct military assistance or providing the resources for Yemen to assemble and to a degree manufacture some of these weapons inside of Yemeni territory. Again, with heavy assistance from Iran. What that's led to is a pretty significant missile and rocket capability. We've already seen this play out in the Red Sea. Yemen already has launched long-range attack drones against southern Israel, which is a significant distance away. They tested, I believe, a unmanned surface vessel detonating in the Red Sea, and they've got a fair amount of one-way attack drones, anti-ship ballistic missiles, and more to be used in any sort of military campaign. Then shifting over to the International Court of Justice, where Israel earlier today defended themselves against claims by South Africa that they're committing a genocide in Gaza. So as a little big picture overview here, South Africa brought these claims forward. Yesterday, they presented their case to the ICJ. Today, Israel had the opportunity to respond. What's expected going forward then is In the next couple weeks, the court will make a decision. If they decide that there is plausible evidence that a genocide could be occurring, they'll push forward into a further investigation, an official investigation that is expected to take years to complete. In their comments, Israel said this court is trying to stop Israel defending its civilians against an organization which pursues a genocidal agenda against them. They say that Israel is committed to complying with the law amid the war, but it does so in the face of Hamas's utter contempt for the law, arguing that the appalling suffering of civilians, both Israeli and Palestinian, is the result of Hamas's strategy of hiding behind innocents. Israel pushed back on the South African claims that I covered in a video yesterday, saying they cherry-picked items to produce random quotes which are not in conformity with government policy, which is misleading at best. They cited IDF standing orders specifying the need to differentiate between military and civilian targets and numerous comments made by Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant declaring that the goal of the war is to destroy Hamas and that it does not target the Palestinian people. They added that remarks or actions by a soldier do not and cannot reflect policy. What comes from the IDF Chief of Staff clearly show the intent to prevent and reduce civilian casualties and following the rules of war. And they wrapped up by saying that genocide stands alone among violations of international law as the epitome of evil. And if the charge of genocide is leveled incorrectly, the essence of this crime would be lost. But that's all I've got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. Substack now also has ad-free, sponsor-free videos that go live about 1 hour before they're up on YouTube. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.